Looking for real stories that lift you up? Welcome to Inspire and Impact, the podcast where purpose meets perseverance. This is where transformation begins and your story continues.
Welcome to the Inspire and Impact podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Rosenstein. The show features real conversations with thought leaders, healers, entrepreneurs, and creators to share their journeys of growth, purpose, and making meaningful impact. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Garrett Biss. Garrett, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Great. Can you introduce yourself to the audience and share a little bit about who you are?
Yes, certainly. My name's Garrett Biss. I live in North Carolina, and I spent about 17 years serving in the Marine Corps. And then in 2015, I transitioned out of the Marines, dealt with some personal struggles and challenges, which I'm sure we'll dig into, and then found my way into working in the addiction recovery field, specifically helping individuals and with a veteran focus, helping individuals that have struggled with mental health challenges, substances, addictions, to find a path back to a better place in their life and really learn what they can do to create the version of their life that they want.
Was there any defining moment that you wanted to get back and help other, veterans, help them with their issues? What made you decide to?
Absolutely. As I go through my own experience, unfortunately what I realized, so I kind of got to the crossroads of my life, and really when I was at that rock bottom or the point of transition in my life, I was struggling with a lot of the things that we hear veterans struggle with regularly. And after transitioning from the military, I found myself in a place where I was struggling financially. My relationships were struggling. I'd lost a part of my identity, and I really felt like my life was falling apart. And for me, it came to a place where I started thinking about how I could get out of that pain. And honestly, suicidal ideation started to kind of take over. And it's when I couldn't tell with certainty, like when the thought of joining that 22 veterans a day, when that didn't shock me anymore, I realized I was getting a little too close to crossing that line. I don't know if it was going to be something I would ever follow through on. I don't know if I did, if it would have been that day or not, but I realized I was getting too close to that line for comfort. And fortunately, something awoken inside of me, and I began to reach out and try to find some things that I could do to get back to a better place. Navigating through that and kind of getting on the other side, I feel, through any struggle, through any strain that we go through or any suffering that we go through, there's a lot that we gain from it. A lot of times we focus on the things that we lost or on the pain that we experienced at the time. But honestly, there's a lot of that we gain from it. When I began to understand some of the awareness and some of the tools and some of the, the support that helped me through my journey, I realized that I wanted to make the most of my own suffering. So maybe it was a little bit in a selfish way, but I wanted that to be worth something, and I wanted to make the most of it. So what I was inspired to do was help start sharing my journey and my experience with other veterans to help provide them the clarity and some of the lessons that I learned through my own journey. And then really that came to the conclusion, or not really the conclusion, but the professional shift or the transition to supporting veterans was really when I delivered a TEDx talk last year. And the name of the talk was the unspoken trauma that all veterans face. And the message of that talk was just really looking at the transition from military service and everything that is lost and the emotional foundation that we have for well-being, which is really cracked or shattered through that transition, and how this is the gateway, or this is the thing that leads to a lot of the pain and suffering that veterans feel. I thought that was a really important message for veterans to hear, because as I was going through that struggle and through that darkness myself, one of the things that made it the hardest was not understanding why, not having any idea where this pain was coming from or what it was exactly that was creating this difficulty in my life. And I think had I had some clue or some inclination as to where that pain came from, it would have made the suffering a lot easier. It would have inspired me with some hope that things could and would get better. So if nothing else, I at least want veterans to hear that message, or loved ones of veterans to hear that message, to better understand that internal pain and struggle that so many veterans go through.
Can I ask you, what compelled you to create your own program versus having the other traditional methods, like seeing a traditional therapist? Maybe there may be some programs the military offers, I'm not aware of because I wasn't in the military. I mean, did you find something that was missing in the traditional therapy, or other programs are out there already that compelled you to create your own programs?
That's a great question. Yeah, certainly. So a great question. So from the little bit that I knew at the time, I was willing to recognize, at least to myself, that I had problematic behaviors with certain substances and behaviors. And I knew that they were creating negative costs or consequences in my life. From what I understood about traditional treatment and everything that was out there to help people with problematic behaviors, whether you call it addiction, substance use disorder, however you look at it or call it, what I understood of them was that I felt there was too much focus on the substance or the behavior. Now, I've come to realize that's not necessarily the case, but from my limited perspective at the time, I thought, I don't want to address a specific substance or a specific issue, because from my experience of what I was going through at the time, I realized how I felt was I was fighting a demon inside of me. I didn't know what that demon was, but it was creating a lot of pain and suffering in my life. But what I realized, and from that perspective, the only tool that I had, the only sword that I could pick up to fight this demon were these substances and behaviors that I was using to help numb the pain of the situation. I didn't want to remove the sword. I wanted to remove the demon. And so that, at least that was my understanding at the time and my perspective. And I'm glad that I had that. And I think it was really probably divinely guided in many ways, because what that did was it opened my eyes to seeking other things, alternative things. And for me, I found a great pathway to my recovery through some coaching and mentorship that I had that wasn't geared toward a substance or behavior. It was really geared toward the individual, helping us identify what's missing in us, what's missing in our life, and reconnecting with our sense of self-worth, our sense of confidence, regaining a mission and a sense of meaning and purpose in our life. And to me, that was the pathway to getting rid of that demon that was inside of me. And because of that, there was a lot of things I was introduced to and a lot of things that I picked up that were extremely helpful for me that I saw other individuals had never been introduced to and never learned about, wasn't part of their journey. And I thought there was a lot of opportunity there to help individuals either accelerate their journey in recovery or find an alternate path to their journey in recovery that was more mirrored to the experience that I had. So ultimately, after many years, I decided to take a lot of my experience, a lot of education that I had gone back and received in applied positive psychology and human potential training, and take what I'd learned that was most helpful for me and put it into a program that could help other individuals experience a similar path.
Do you think that the military veterans are even aware about the resources that are, out there to really help them? Do you think it's not really promoted well, in the military? A lot of people they go through the military don't even know that these programs or resources don't even exist.
Yeah. So in the mental health industry at large, one of the biggest challenges is getting awareness out there about the tools and resources that are available. And this just comes back to the nature of the service or of the industry. If you or I were to have a new coffee shop open up or a new restaurant open up in our town, and we went there, we had an amazing experience, we would go tell everybody that we knew about that experience. However, if you went and you received mental health care, if you had a loved one that went and received addiction care, you might share it with your best friend or some of your closest circle, but you're not more widely going to broadcast that. So I think that's a huge barrier that just the industry at large has. That said, there are a lot of nonprofits and a lot of organizations that do support veterans. The last I heard, there's more than 43,000 nonprofits in this country that are specifically geared towards certain veteran needs. There is a challenge there of connecting the individual that needs the tool or resource with that resource at the time that they need it. And this also comes back to the nature of somebody's struggle. If you're at a time in your life when things are going pretty well, and maybe you have the capacity to do some research and look and find some resources or solve and navigate problems, but the time that you really need the help, you're in a place in your life where maybe you don't have the capacity to do anything except for to navigate the pain that you're dealing with at the time. So this resourcefulness, this creativity, this ability to go out and to find those resources can be a tremendous challenge. That's where the role of peer support specialists and many individuals that are maybe working in the mental health field, but they themselves aren't clinicians, or maybe they are clinicians. That's where the really important role falls of continuous outreach, continuous of marketing, continuous of trying to connect those individuals. Because here's the truth of it. There might be an amazing program and I hear about it today. If I don't need it today, I'm going to forget about it by tomorrow. If I get to a place in my life a year now where I could really leverage that program, it's not likely I'm going to remember it. So this is a responsibility on those of us that are providing services for veterans to continuously broadcast and share the kind of support that we're providing so that when somebody needs it, they can get access to it. To that point, though, about veterans, one thing that I like to echo and share with anytime I'm talking with or to veterans is some recent legislation that was passed called the Compact Act. And what this act says is that anybody who's been in the service, there's some qualifications, you have to have been in the service in recent years for a certain amount of time. Most veterans will qualify for this. If you're in a mental health crisis, not only is there a crisis line that you can call, but there's also, through this legislation, you can go to any mental health or medical facility and receive care. So if you're with a veteran, a veteran calls you on the phone and they're in a mental health crisis, they can go into any public hospital, any public treatment facility, and they'll have to provide some supportive care, and the VA will pick up the tab. So that's a big barrier, is not knowing where you can go or where the VA might cover. Well, through this Compact Act, the legislation, they'll cover, anywhere. That can remove a tremendous barrier, especially when somebody's in crisis.
That's good to know, as you said, because a lot of the veterans I spoke to didn't seem like a lot of them were aware about all these different resources out there. Can I ask you, what was like the biggest challenge, some of the biggest challenges you had going from military life to civilian life, like making that transition? Was it like a big deal? Was it a big challenge making that transition?
Yeah, absolutely it was. And the hardest thing was, again, that understanding what I was going to go through, what I was going to experience, and really just finding myself in the pain and not understanding why or how I got there. And one analogy I share is, if you woke up someday and you found yourself, all of a sudden you had this physiological or this medical condition, and you're finding your heart racing, you're finding you're perspiring, your muscles are aching, you're feeling fatigue, your muscles are even burning at sometimes. And you just have this general lack of fatigue and your lower energy. And this is a feeling or the sensations that come on, and maybe it lasts for an hour or two a day, but it comes back a couple of times a week. Well, not understanding where it comes from can be very scary and can create a lot more fear, which exacerbates the problems or the challenges. Now, how about we take that same context, these same symptoms that we have, and we realize that this is occurring at the time that we're at the gym and we're exercising. So yes, now it makes more sense that our muscles are burning, that we're having fatigue, that our heart is racing, that we're short of breath, because we have that meaning that's associated in that context and that understanding. You don't have this loss of hope. You understand what's happening. You can appreciate the struggle because it's guiding you to better health and better wellness. So you'll even invite it into your life. I think this is very similar when we find ourselves in an emotionally challenging or trying place. If we don't understand the context of what it is that we're experiencing, if we see it only as something that's bad and we can't appreciate it as part of the growth process that's helping us achieve something that we want to achieve, then it can be very difficult to deal with that momentary suffering. So I share all this to say that was the hardest part of the transition for me. It was and what I later came to realize was the loss of connection. We're human, as human beings, we're biological creatures. We have all the basic needs of biological creatures, but as humans, we also have these other fundamental needs for our emotional well-being. First and foremost is our need for connection. We need a sense of belonging. We need to be part of a tribe. It's as important even for our health and wellness, our emotional regulation, our ability to deal with and process stress, all comes back to our connections with other individuals. The connection that you have in the military is unlike any connection that you will experience outside of the military. This sense of brotherhood or sisterhood, this degree to which we are connected with this tribe that we're a part of, is unlike anything that you'll experience outside the military. And for many individuals that join the service, they do so at 18 to 22 years of age. And what we realize now about the brain development, about our sense of identity and our understanding and values and beliefs of the world, a lot of that is created in our early to mid 20s. So this is an individual that their entire adult life, they've looked at the world and they've had a sense of understanding of the world, and they've met their needs for connection in a certain way. And when you separate from the military, that's stripped away from you. So that's a big challenge. And then another part that goes with that is we also have a fundamental human need for a positive self-identity. We have a need for feeling good about ourselves or having a sense of self-worth and self-confidence. And a lot of this comes through where it's expressed as our permission or our ability to show up authentically. If you can show up authentically and you can express your wants and share your needs and ask for the things that you need from others and not hide parts of yourself, this is what facilitates the deepest levels of connection. What a lot of veterans find when they transition out of the service is, in reality, we're cut from a different cloth. Service members, there's certain things that are about us. There's certain things that are developed into us, but we see and we operate differently, very differently than many other people or most civilians. Now, this isn't good or bad. It's just a recognition that there's a difference there. And very quickly, what a lot of veterans find is as they try to transition out into the civilian world, they find that there's something about them, whether it's their level of intensity, whether it's looking at everything through a lens of life or death, whether it's the sense of humor that many of us develop as a coping mechanism to deal with some extremely challenging times that we go through. There's certain things about us, about the values and beliefs that we have that we find very quickly aren't very welcomed or accepted in the civilian world. So what does this lead to? This leads to veterans learning that there's things about us that we need to hide about ourselves if we want to be accepted, if we want to regain that sense of belonging or that connection. There's parts of us that we need to hide. The unfortunate cost and the truth of that is, as we feel that there's something about us, that we're also giving ourselves a message that we are somehow not good enough, lovable, or acceptable just as we are, that we're only acceptable when we hide parts of our truth. So this deteriorates that sense of self-worth. This deteriorates our ability to even foster nurturing connections, because anytime somebody's connecting with the masks that you're wearing, they're not connecting with you. They're connecting with the mask, so that you don't receive the benefits of the physiological, the emotional, the spiritual benefits of that sense of belonging and connection. So this continues to erode an individual's sense of self-worth. And for me, this really describes a lot of that void that I felt inside. This was a lot of the demon that I was dealing with. I had lived my entire adult life with this positive identity, with this understanding of who I was, with the context for the value that I provided as an individual, the value that I provided to the country. And when that was stripped away, I wasn't left with much. And that created this downward spiral that we went through. And then the last thing is the sense of meaning. And that's a really important need that we have, not just for providing direction in our life, but as I've come to find out, meaning in our life is also what provides our capacity to endure suffering. If you're familiar with the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl, he talks all about man's search for meaning in his popular book. And what he shares is that it's our sense of meaning in life. It's the meaning that we give to the experiences that we have that provide our capacity to endure that suffering. Thinking back to that, this theoretical medical condition that we're experiencing, if we don't understand what it means, then it can only lead to fear and more anxiety and more stress and a worse mental and physical state in our life. So if we're experiencing this temporary displeasure, this temporary discomfort in our body, and we don't know why, it doesn't make sense to us, it's very difficult to deal with. If we realize that in the context of meaning, that this pain and suffering that we're inviting is part of us strengthening our body for our own well-being, then we can endure that pain and we'll even invite it into our life more. This is true for a lot of things. So military members, if you join the service for the sense of meaning that you get, this provides a tremendous capacity to endure even the hardest things in life. When you lose that sense of meaning, now even the normal everyday things, whether it's rush hour traffic, or whether it's financial strain, or whether it's opportunity or relationship strain, all of these things are just normal forms of discomfort in our life. But if we've lost the capacity to deal with it, and again, this leads us to a place where for many veterans, the only path out of that pain and that discomfort is through a substance or a behavior that helps numb that pain.
I mean, thank you for sharing all that. One of the mouthful is like great information, especially from an outside.
Yeah.
It's like sort of the knowledge. Like, I didn't know about all these things. And I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I just imagine somebody serving, especially like in the war, like there's Iraq War, Vietnam War, or any war. I mean, that probably gave you a lot of sense of purpose or identity, like that, part of that event, or that time in history. And then so it's over. It's, what do you do? Who are you? And I can see also like being part of that camaraderie and having, losing that stuff and shake up, in the mind. It's like, must be like a pretty tough thing to deal with. And you said, like, I can't imagine like being in that type of situation. That definitely builds a level of resilience probably to handle any situation. You probably think like anything here in civilian life is 10 times easier than dealing with really serious matters like that. I want to ask you, I mean, so you've been like sharing with us, you've been like through this healing and transformation process. What exactly does that look like for you? I mean, like you showed about this little demon inside. I mean, is that demon now gone? I mean, or did you transform into something else?
I think a lot of transformation, so a lot of transmuting, that pain or that energy into inspiration and motivation and drive, ambition. And that comes back to that finding the meaning in it. And we can delve a little bit more deeply into this, but a lot of what maybe that demon's still around, it's still a little motivator, but now he's kind of sitting on the bench off to the side. He's not living inside of me, sucking all my energy, but it's still a recognition there. But now with this new meaning, with this new context, I appreciate it for what it is and for what it was in my life. it wasn't just a period to experience and to endure suffering. It was an opportunity to grow. Anytime we're experiencing an internal struggle, that's indicative of us being outside of our comfort zone. And the only time that we're going to grow, the only time that we're going to learn or grow or become a better version of ourselves is when we're outside of that comfort zone. So contextually, I appreciate it a lot differently. And I appreciate the direction that it sent me on in my life and how my past and the suffering and struggling in my past was really setting me up for the purpose that I found in my life. So the unique process that I went through, and actually I just got done putting a whole curriculum together for veterans, this one for veteran inmates, but it kind of follows the similar path. So one of the things I did for my own healing journey and for my own personal development was I studied applied positive psychology. So positive psychology is, as opposed to traditional psychology, we typically think of psychology or clinical treatment or care as helping individuals identify what's wrong with them and then mitigating whatever the symptoms are, the signs, symptoms, the diseases, whatever's showing up. So positive psychology really looks at the individual from the other perspective and helps individuals identify what's right about them. What are the strengths that they do have? What are some past wins and successes? Where are their clues in what you've done and what you've survived in the past that you can leverage now to move forward in your life? And in positive psychology, it's taught as 5 pathways to human flourishing. And they look at different areas of the human experience. The first is positivity or emotional resilience. The second is engagement and really bringing your strengths into what you're doing, as opposed to navigating life, just trying to mitigate threats from the weaknesses that we have and just trying to, oh, this is a potential threat and I'm not good at this, so I better find some way to avoid that. Positive psychology recognizes, let's give value to and take ownership of the strengths that we have. And then we can lean into adversity or lean into challenging times with those strengths. The next pathway is relationships. So building the relationships, understanding the negative effects of certain relationships in our life and understanding the tremendous positive effect of certain relationships in our life. And then maneuvering or navigating so we can get more of the good and mitigate, some of the negative influence that we might have. The next pathway to human flourishing is meaning. So this entire role of meaning, what does that have to do with our past? If we can, Viktor Frankl also said, sometimes suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. And there's this whole field of study now called post-traumatic growth. It's not now, it's been around since the early 90s, but post-traumatic growth recognizes how traumatic experiences that somebody has had in their past can also be a catalyst for tremendous amount of strength and growth that couldn't have occurred had it not been for that traumatic experience. Again, this is kind of looking at it from that positive psychology side. What are the benefits that can come out of some of the past adversities and struggles? And then with meaning, we also look to the future. So meaning in the future can be guided by our sense of purpose in our life. What are our passions? What can we learn from our passions? What can we learn from our past? And depending on your philosophical or spiritual belief system, I believe that the things that occurred to us in our past are in some way preparing us for the things that we want to achieve in the future. I don't think that we are intended to suffer just for the sake of suffering. I think the suffering that we do experience, whether that's the traumatic experiences that we have or the hardships, in some way, this is intended in our service. And I believe that if we can connect the hardships and the traumas from our past to our purpose and to what we want to aspire to become, it's a lot easier to deal with some of those. We can release a lot of the pain, the resentment, the frustration, and the anger from a lot of those past troubling experiences that we had, if we can see how that maps to who we're trying to become. And then the last pathway is achievement. And this is all the things that we can do within our control to help us, achieve better things in our life. So this is what I was exposed to. And this is really what my journey was. That demon for me came from a loss of connection, a loss of permission to be authentic, which affected my emotional resilience. It affected the way that I felt about myself. It affected the relationships that I had, and it affected the behaviors that I was engaged in to help deal with that pain. And then a big part of my demon was that loss of meaning and purpose. For my entire adult life, I had a very strong sense of meaning and purpose. I knew who I was. I knew the value that I was providing every day I got up and went to work. And when that was stripped away from me, I also lost my capacity to deal with a lot of the regular adversities that we face in our lives.
Thank you very much for sharing about that. I wanted to ask kind of like a philosophical question, because you keep talking about like pain and suffering. And do you think that's part of everybody's life that they go through? things like, is that something like almost like the like part of the human condition? Or is that think, that's just part of a few people that experience that? I feel like all humans have been something where they went through the military and now it's something that we have to learn to deal with and build that resilience out for.
Yeah, I think that everything that we experience in our life can be useful. And I think if we can look back at some of the adversity that we've experienced in the past, and we can map it to something in our life, it's all through the lens through which we look at things. You can look at any situation or any event in your life and you can find cost from it. You can find things that you lost, whether it's the loss of your peace of mind for the period of time that you were struggling and suffering. And you can also look at any adversity or any struggle in our life and you can find ways that you've grown. Maybe just your capacity to endure suffering grew, but through everything that we've learned in our life and every new skill, every new talent, every way that we've grown as an individual, whether it's maturing through adolescence and through early adulthood, everything that has benefited us to become a better version of ourselves in some way has only come through struggle, through suffering. I mean, when you're grinding it out in college, like that's not easy. And it's because it's not easy that you grow through the experience. So I think everything that we've gained in our life has come as the payment for, or the return on investment from some kind of suffering that we've had in the past. The invitation and the challenge for us is now to look back at anything that we're holding on to and identify how it is that was there for our service. I believe that everything that happens to us happens for us. So every struggling time, every challenge that we face, it takes a certain state of mind to be able to kind of connect the dots sometimes. And I think the ultimate place and where I try to get to, and I'm not there often, but the ultimate place is that anything can happen in my life. And I don't immediately go into this fight or flight state and try and focus on the negative aspects of it or the pain that I'm experiencing, but holding at least the possibility that in some way or somehow this is working out for me. Whether it's a simple thing like you're driving home from work and you get a flat tire. Now you're stuck on the side of the road and all you're thinking about is the cost that you're going to be home late. You're going to miss dinner. You're going to upset your evening schedule. You're going to have this expense for this flat tire. Now you're stuck on the side of the road. Even in that moment, if we can say, okay, I don't know what it is, but I'm at least open to the possibility that somehow this is working to my advantage. If we can at least hold on to that frame of mind or that reference for a moment, then maybe we can see the evidence around us that does exist. Now, maybe you're not going to see it every time, but sometimes you're going to realize that, man, had I not had that flat tire, I might have been involved in that car accident that happened 3 miles up the road. Maybe I would have, gotten home at an inopportune time, or maybe I wouldn't have had this 15, 20 minutes sitting in my car waiting for the tow truck where I realized something, where the answer to something came to me. Maybe you meet somebody when you're going to pick up your car the next day with your new tire and you start a new friendship or you have a new business opportunity. All of these things happen all of the time. If we're so stuck in the suffering and in the cost that we're paying for it, then we're closed off to identifying these things and really living from the benefit of it. Again, I said it takes a certain state of mind. I'm certainly not there all the time where I can have this kind of presence, even in the midst of adversity. But as quickly as I can get back to it, I try to get back to it. And if I'm really struggling or holding on to something from the past, then I try to look at and recognize things that came to me as a benefit or as a result of that struggling. Because again, I don't think that any suffering is intended for suffering's sake. I think that everything that we experience in our life is somehow intended to serve us in a way.
So I want to talk about what you just mentioned, like having the right mindset. Can you give advice to maybe people who are either the veterans, maybe not veterans, maybe watching the show that maybe it's like currently suffering, a little bit lost, confused? Is there any advice you can give to those people in terms of like first steps, like a quick mind shift of how to start getting out of that, the darkness where it's like, oh, I have no hope, I have no meaning, I have no purpose. I mean, from your experiences and your training, is there any advice you can give to people in our audience about that? First steps to get out of that.
Yeah, certainly. So first and foremost, I mean, what I'm sharing and a lot of the work that I do now is in the context of veterans. However, I don't know if you know this, but before veterans were service members, they were also humans. And I say that a bit in jest, but what I realize is that a lot of the ways that struggles show up for veterans, it's just a different flavor of, or a different expression of the same things that every human goes through. Everything I just shared about that transition from military service is also something that every other human might experience to a degree whenever they have a major transition in their life. Whether it's you're graduating from college and now your circle of friends is no longer as you move out into the real world and start a career. Maybe you've worked in one industry for a number of years and now you've transitioned out, or maybe you've had kids and now you're an empty nester. Like whether your foundation for connection, authenticity, and meaning shifts or is interrupted, you're going to have some challenges with the same things that veterans do. Like I said, it's going to look different, be to a different degree, but this is something a lot of people face. So the same thing that I would share with any veterans is also applicable to any human that has this tendency or that feel like they're stuck in the same way. Now, there's a lot of work that I do and exercises and processes that I go through, but what it takes first and foremost a willingness, and it takes some intention. So we can change things if we're willing to, and then we need to bring some intention to it. So every way that we think, every way that we react, every way that we show up in life, whether it's the habits that we have, the thoughts that we have, whatever that is, every way that we show up as an individual at all times is merely the byproduct of the experiences that we've had in our life and the way that we've been trained or conditioned along the way. We're all doing the best that we can at the time with the limited energy and resources and knowledge and awareness that we have. And if you don't like how you're doing, first thing to do is to recognize that. The second thing is to, with that awareness, be willing. Are you willing to do something? And not everybody is, and not everybody is all the time. Sometimes we're just doing the best that we can to hang on. But when you get to that place where you're willing to make some changes and you bring some intention behind it, then there's a lot of simple things that we can do to begin to shift this mindset that we have. So it's often shared that we have thoughts, and then these thoughts create emotions. And then as emotional creatures, we typically act based on that emotion that we have. I'd like to edit this equation and add something else to the left side of the equation, that it's first and foremost the mindset that we have that determines the thoughts that we have, which then influences the emotions that we have, which ultimately leads to the way that we act or that we respond or react. So it's to shift this mindset. If the mindset is what creates, it's the palette of thoughts that we can have. If we have a very limited or a negative, if the mindset that we've developed and been trained over our years is a very negative mindset, and we're living in a scarcity place, and we're navigating based on beliefs that we've developed or that were passed on to us, that the world is a dangerous place. You can't trust anybody. Unfair things are going to happen all the time. You always got to be on edge. You always got to be on guard. Anything that's bad, we're just waiting for the shoe to drop. Like however this thought process is, whatever this natural thought process is, that's a byproduct of the mindset that you have. So if your mindset is very limited to this small spectrum of thoughts and therefore this small spectrum of emotions, the first thing that we need to do is expand the palette of thoughts that mindset can entail. So with mindset, one of the things that's talked about most regularly is the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Fixed mindset, the gist of it is that a fixed mindset person believes that however they are, that's who they are and that's how they're going to be. Whatever they were good at in elementary school, they're going to be good at for the rest of their life. If they're really inclined with mathematics and science, then that's who they are and that's what they are. And if they were terrible, this was my experience in high school. I love math, I love science, I was terrible at everything else. It's even ingrained in us or shared regularly in our culture that there is people that can only be right-brained or left-brained, or if you're good at math and just design a life based on the fact that you're good at math and that you're horrible at the arts or other creative things. That's a relatively new belief system, because if we look back even just a couple hundreds of years, we recognize that some of the greatest mathematicians and scientists were also the greatest artists, were also the greatest theologians. It was recognized that somebody can really thrive or really excel in all areas of human endeavor, not just one or the other. But that's what the fixed mindset is, that if I'm good at something, I'm going to be good at it. If I've struggled with something up until now, I'm going to continue to struggle. A growth mindset recognizes the reality that we as individuals can continue to grow and evolve. If we weren't good at something in the past, it doesn't mean we can't become good at it now and in the future. If we always struggle with something, it means that we don't have to continue to struggle with that. We can learn, we can adapt, whether it's in an emotional and a mindset perspective, or whether it's actually in the structuring of the neurons in our brain and the way that we think and the responses that we have naturally. So coming back to mindset, there's some simple things that we can do with an intention to begin to adjust that. One of the first exercises I always do with the individuals I'm working with is I'll hand them a sheet of paper, and I'll say, go ahead and write down 100 wins and successes that you've had in your life. The normal response that I get is deer in the headlights, and they look back at me and they say, Garrett, I'm 30, I'm 40, I'm 50 years old. I haven't had 100 wins and successes. For me, that's a litmus test for where their mindset is at the time. Because the truth is, I don't care how many things that you've messed up in your life or how old you are, you've had not hundreds, but thousands, if not tens of thousands of wins and successes along the way. Part of our biology and part of the way that we're hardwired is for survival. And this means threat detection. So it can be our natural hardwiring to be more negatively focused. And what this means is that we give more energy to and more awareness to things that we've messed up in our past. If I were to tell the same person to write down a list of 100 mistakes that you've had, they would say, give me a couple more sheets of paper because I'm going to fill all this up. Because we tend to remember mistakes that we've had in the past because those mistakes could become a threat to us now or in the future if we repeat them. The wins and successes that we've had along the way, the time that we learned how to ride our bike, or we got an A on that test, or we knocked it out of the park in that presentation, that's not going to become a threat to our future. Very quickly, we will dismiss or forget that win or success. This comes back to that palette of thoughts and emotions that you might have. If the only thing that you can remember and the only thing that you're aware of are the weaknesses that you have, the mistakes that you've made in the past, the only thing that you can create from that is a horrible self-esteem and a lack of confidence, which puts you into a constant fear state. So with this simple exercise, what we're doing is beginning to expand that palette. Let's give ourselves credit where credit is due. If I'm going to beat myself up for that little mistake that I made yesterday, then why shouldn't I give myself credit for the good things that I did yesterday also? Yeah, maybe I indulged and maybe I had a dessert that I didn't want to, but maybe I got a little bit of exercise in. Maybe I got to bed early and I got some extra sleep. I'm not just going to hang my head and just focus on the misstep that I made. I'm going to focus on the good things as well. And this is that little bit of that shift in that mindset. The other thing is focusing on our weaknesses versus focusing on our strengths. Again, we're hardwired for self-preservation and for protection. So it's natural that we are very aware of the things that we're not good at, because if we're ever put in a situation where we need to be good at something and we're not good at it, then that can be a threat to our well-being and our survival. So we tend to it can be a natural inclination to be constantly aware of and look at life through lenses of things that we're not good at, because those things can lead to potential threats to our well-being. What we too often discount or don't focus on, and many of us couldn't even name them if we were asked, what are the innate strengths that we have? Because yes, we all have innate weaknesses and there's things that we haven't developed yet, but we also all have innate strengths. There's things that we've used in the past to navigate challenges and struggles in our life. What were those strengths that we had? Because if the next time we face an adversity or we're going through a hardship, if the only thing that we can think about is our weaknesses, this is a very reactionary place and it's just merely trying to navigate for our survival. If we can recall some of the strengths that we have, then maybe I can sit down facing this adversity and think, okay, how can I use my creativity? How can I use my ambition? How can I use my love of learning? How can I use my leadership skills? How can I use the natural resilience that I've developed? This is pulling more tools out of our toolbox. And these are actually tools that we can do something with to move forward. So those are two simple things. And you can get in touch with your strengths. There's a lot of tools online, strength assessments. But if you don't know what your strengths are, if you have no idea what you're good at and what your strengths are, that's a very powerful place to start. Opens up that palette for our mindset. This tells us that, yes, maybe I've made mistakes and I'm bad at certain things, but I'm also going to give myself credit for the things that I'm good at and the wins that I've had in the past. This opens up that palette. So when we face a situation or an adversity, our first thought is not, how do I navigate this so it doesn't harm me? Our first thought can be, and what we should intend or what we should aspire to is that our first thought is, how am I going to navigate this successfully? And if it's going to require some pain and suffering along the way, how am I going to leverage that pain and suffering for my own growth so that on the other side of this thing, I actually get to a better place and I'm not merely just trying to survive through life.
Now, I know one of your offerings is the Warrior Reset, which is like a 15-month-a-day experience. Can you maybe share with the audience a little bit more, like, what is like the Warrior Reset and what like inspired you to create that? Like, how does it like help people or?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Warrior Resets, over the last 10, 11 years of studying some different tools and practices that can really help somebody get aligned with and kind of feel recentered and develop mindset or develop that sense of confidence and self-esteem. I've come across hundreds of different tools and processes and ideas and resources. What I wanted to find were, what were the 4 most efficacious, universally beneficial things that somebody can do in the shortest amount of time to create the greatest impact or the greatest shift in their life? And I identified 4 daily practices that make the greatest shift. They're most universally applicable and they can help the most people. And it takes, if you do all 4 of them, it takes less than 15 minutes a day. And if you're curious about what those are, you can go to thewarriorreset.com. I told you I'd give your listeners free access to that. So you can just go to that website, you get free access. There's 4 different daily practices. There's a little audio training to explain it and kind of walk you through it the first time. And then there's some worksheets so that you can kind of track your progress for a period of time. But if you're somebody who feels like you're a little stuck, you need a little refinement, you want some fine tuning, maybe you've got a big thing that you're working on in your life, you want to make sure you're showing up as the best version of yourself and you're not really sure where to focus or where to start, this can be a great way to start. I encourage anybody who tries it, try it for at least 10 consecutive days and then reflect on it. And please report back to me if you'd like, but reflect on me what your experience was like and what you learned and what you gained.
Thank you very much for sharing about that. I also know you have the Valiant Path. That's like a deeper journey than the Warrior Reset, right? Can you explain what exactly is the Valiant Path?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, so the Warrior Reset, really anybody can benefit from it. It's self-guided. You can access it. You can do it on your own. The Valiant Path is the coaching and mentoring program that I developed to guide veterans through a lot of the journey that I experienced. So introducing them to a positive psychology, working on their mindset, their emotional resilience, finding meaning and leveraging the role of meaning in their life, and really getting back on track to make that forward progress, to replace or repair some of the things that they lost, fill some of the voids that might have come since the transition from military service, doing it all in a non-clinical way, all in a way that's really developed for empowering the individual, putting them back in the driver's seat of their own life, and then giving them the tools and the accountability and support to make that progress, to really get from where they are in their life and whatever they're struggling with back to where they want to be and who they want to be in their life.
Can you ever share some fly transformational stories of people that, that have been through one of your programs? What did that really look like?
Yeah, so I've had, in addition to this and outside of my work with veterans, I also run an addiction recovery residence. So this is a non-clinical recovery environment for individuals that have struggled with addiction. And, in this environment that we've created, and these are all individuals that also go through this Valiant Path or a version of this Valiant Path program, we've had a lot of individuals that have been through many treatment centers, many facilities, many sober livings, and continue to hit a roadblock and fall back in their life or in their recovery journey. And one of the beautiful things to watch is, we've had somebody that's been with us for coming up on 2 years now, and he's in his late 30s. This is the first time he's had that stretch of recovery in his life. For about a decade, you would go 3 to 6 months and then something would happen and he'd kind of fall back to. So seeing that he finally has the support and the framework to make that progress and make that growth has been a beautiful thing.
Well, why do you think it's so important for veterans to focus on working on the nervous system, regulation, and self-worth? Why is it, in particular for veterans, why is it so important for them to do these things?
Yeah, because a lot of the foundation that veterans have or that military service members have for their emotional well-being is tied to that role in that military service. So we talked about the sense of connection. Our humans were hardwired for connection. It's even down to, on a molecular level, we're hardwired for connection. And this is why the studies show that if you were to hug somebody or if you hug somebody for 20 seconds or longer, it stimulates a huge flood of oxytocin in the body. So oxytocin is the love or the bonding chemical. And oxytocin is also what reduces the stress hormones in our body. So when we have connection, when we have authentic connections with other individuals, not just through hugs, but through laughing, through sharing stories together, through, it's through smiling, experiencing somebody smile. These are all pro-social things that lead to our emotional and our mental well-being. When we lose that and we lose it abruptly and we're not prepared for it, nobody told me before I transitioned out that, hey, you have these fundamental human needs that you're going to lose the way that you've met them. And you're going to have to navigate life trying to figure out how to get those back. If we don't know that, then this leads to that place where emotionally and on the inside, I felt like I had that clinical diagnosis where there was something that was wrong with me. I didn't know what it was. I didn't really understand where it came from. And because of that, I had so little hope that things could get better. I thought, maybe the best that my life is going to be now is just trying to mitigate and numb this pain, because this is what, if it's here now and I don't know where it came from, then it's probably going to be here forever. And that's at least that's where I was mentally. And that's what I was thinking. So extremely important for veterans to be prepared for, and then to help navigate this journey as they transition out, as their identity that they once had is stripped away as the sense of meaning and purpose that they once had is stripped away, and those connections and that sense of bonding and brotherhood or sisterhood is stripped away, they need to have at least the awareness and then the tools and support to navigate back to a better place. For our, there's about 15 million veterans in the United States, I believe, or 19 million veterans in the United States. As a population, veterans are more than twice as likely to struggle with mental health challenges or struggle with addiction. 1 in 5 post 9/11 veterans is going to experience or be diagnosed with PTSD in their life. And veterans are committing suicide at a rate at least twice, if not 4 times their peer population. This is something that's tragic. This is really what inspires me, that so much suffering can be experienced and this burden can be carried by so many veterans who are individuals who at the start of their adult life decided that they wanted to step forward and be of service to something greater than themselves. And for these individuals that have done that and done something for their country, their community, their neighbors, their family, it's really sad and really tragic to me that the kind of the state of the veteran population these days and what they're struggling, what they're going through.
What can you say to maybe like a veteran that has already tried traditional therapy, like counseling, medication, rehab, but they still feel kind of stuck or lost? What advice or, what can you say to something like that? Is how try things hasn't worked out for them yet?
Yeah, so I understand there's about 30 million adults in America that are struggling with some form of substance or behavioral addiction. Now, maybe it hasn't manifested to a clinically diagnosable condition, but there's about 30 million individuals that are it's almost 60 million individuals that are kind of struggling with a problematic substance or behavior. There's then about 28 million to 30 million individuals that are a clinically diagnosable condition. And there's about 28 to 30 million individuals that are experiencing or living in some form of recovery. The reason I point that out is because of these 110 million people that we're talking about, that's 110 million different stories, 110 million different life paths, 110 million different combinations of experiences and events and traumas that led somebody to this dark place. The thought that there's going to be 1 or 10 or 100 or 10,000 pathways out of that darkness is kind of absurd to suggest, but that seems to be a lot of what's promoted. Yes, there are many very helpful and beautiful, therapies and processes to help individuals get to a better place. But I point this out because everybody has a different path into the darkness. Everybody's going to require a different combination of tools, resources, and support to get out of that darkness and get back to the better or the best expression in their life. So I say that to encourage individuals. If you've tried 1 or 5 or 10 different, things in the past and they haven't taken, don't come to the conclusion that you're so broken and so defective that you're hopeless and that you're helpless. Realize that you just need to find your right combination. There's certain needs, there's certain wounds, there's certain hurts that you have that need to be addressed if you want to get to that better place. I say that with a caveat or with a warning that if you've tried something and maybe this support group didn't help or that treatment didn't help, and you think that something wrong with the treatment, I do warn people to question, did you fully buy into it? Are you just in denial? Are you trying to avoid responsibility for your life? Or is there something which is more likely, there's something in that program or in that approach or in that resource that wasn't truly helpful for you? And anybody that's in that position, I'll say, I'm just as open to, it's not more open to the fact that you need to find a different combination of tools, resources, and support. However, you got to have that intention. You got to have that and that desire and that willingness to find some things to change, because that's the only way that we're going to get out of a dark situation. If we're in a dark situation and we're doing the best that we can, that's okay. And we can get out of that dark situation by learning to do and become a better person, a version of ourselves. Maybe that's when we learn how to better deal with some of the struggles so that we can show up a little differently or a little better. We can make different decisions. We can respond in different ways. But that's all something that we have to learn. It's all unique to our own journey. We talked a little bit about some clinical support, and that's where a lot of people turn, and many people are helped that way. And that's a great step or a great path to take. For me, I didn't feel that was a path for me, at least initially. I've seen a lot of therapists, a lot of clinical supports, over the last couple of years. What I understand about the clinical role and about traditional psychology is, again, they are trained to identify diseases, signs, and symptoms and figure out what's wrong with an individual and then help them do some things so that they can mitigate the negative effects of what's wrong with them. From the coaching or the non-clinical perspective or positive psychology perspective, we try to do the same thing. We're really geared towards helping somebody get to a better place in their life, but we come at it from a different approach. So if that's something that you've never tried before, this might be something that you'd like to bring into or if not to complement your recovery journey or your healing journey, then to, maybe just some additional support that you can use. I think of this analogy a lot of, if we think of a hot air balloon, and maybe the height or the elevation of the hot air balloon in the sky is representative of how well somebody is doing in their life, or how much of their potential for happiness and joy and success they're living into. And the higher that hot air balloon goes, it would represent that somebody is doing better or more fully thriving or flourishing in their life. If we want that hot air balloon to go higher so that somebody's life can get to a better place, there's two ways that we can adjust the elevation of that hot air balloon. The first thing that we can do is we can cut some of the sandbags, or we can dump some weight out of the basket so the hot air balloon can go higher. The other thing that we can do is put some more hot air in the balloon so it has more upward force or lift to pick it up higher. When I think of traditional psychology and the clinical role, really their focus is on what is those things that are holding somebody down. How can we clip some more sandbags? How can we get some weight out of that basket so they can get back to a better place? From a non-clinical or a coaching perspective or a peer support perspective, it's really about how do we leverage what that individual already has to put some more lift or some more hot air in that hot air balloon so they can get to a better place. Because at the end of the day, there's only so much benefit. There's only so much weight that you can remove. If you're a hot air balloon and your basket is sitting on the ground, you can cut all the sandbags away. You're still not going to go up in the air. You're not going to go higher. You need at some point, you need to leverage what's inside of you, your true worth. You need to be reconnected with your true worth, your true value. You need to learn some skills for regulation and for finding meaning and purpose in your life, because that's what's going to ultimately guide your journey to a better place. I don't want to just help somebody get out of the gutter and up onto the curb. I want to help somebody move from that curb up the mountain into their potential and what they want to experience in life.
And what do you say to somebody that sometimes they're reluctant to join, like a program because they think, I want to heal my own problems myself. Why do I have to go to somebody else? It seems almost like a sign of weakness to, join a program or reach out for help. So what do you say to people that have that type of mindset?
Yeah. So they say there's this phrase that's passed around a lot that our sickness is in our secrets. And when somebody's in a bad place and when they're struggling with some shame or guilt or remorse over things that they've experienced in our past, we already talked about how that's a pathway to inauthentic connections. Anytime you have to hide a part of yourself to establish connection, you're not actually getting the benefits of connection. So this suffering or this suffering in silence is only something that can hold you down or hold you back. It's natural to have fear about sharing that. And this is the reason that we put on these masks, because we might have a belief that if somebody were to know this about me, they would think lesser of me. So we want to keep it to ourselves. And this fear about sharing this with others is a major barrier that keeps a lot of us stuck. I will tell you that whether it's with a support group, whether it's with a therapist, whether it's a friend or a pastoral counselor, when you can relieve yourself, when you can share some things about yourself and release some of that shame, this is one of the quickest things that you can do that will remove some of your emotional burden, that will lighten the load of your pack, and will help you start to make more progress in your life. Because here's the thing, no matter what you've done in your life and what you've experienced, there's a version of you inside that is still lovable and acceptable and worthy of happiness and joy and fulfillment. And you need to get reconnected with that version of you. You need to understand the worth that you have as an individual. If you aren't meant to be here, if you were just meant to struggle, then something would have taken you out by now. But if you're still here, that means that you're meant to be here. And as I said, I don't think suffering or struggling is intended just for the purpose or the sake of struggling or suffering. It's really here to help guide us to that growth and to becoming that better version of ourselves. And one of the biggest barriers that people face is this fear or this shame that prevents them from sharing part of their truth and ever reaching out for and seeking help. This is one of the biggest benefits that comes from support groups. And whether that's a large group that you sit in or a small support group of one other individual, or a small support group of just yourself, if that's where you need to start. When you can start sharing some of these things and shining some light on some of these things, then that sickness that hides in our secrets can begin to be healed and can begin to be lessened. I talked about trauma in the past and the role of meaning in our life. And one of these things that we found is this whole field of study, the post-traumatic growth. And they said that many times the difference between experiencing post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic growth is finding meaning for the suffering. So if we could find some kind of meaning for that suffering, this promotes post-traumatic growth. And there's like a flywheel, or there's a roadmap for experiencing post-traumatic growth in your life. And one of them is self-regulation. So learning some things we can do to regulate our own nervous system so that we can maintain that positive mindset a little better. Another thing is with sharing and with disclosure. because disclosing some of the things that we're holding on to in the past and removing some of that pain or that burden that we're carrying, that's going to accelerate our journey to healing and growth.
Garrett, if somebody have a question from our conversation today or interested in working with you or joining one of your programs, what's the best way that they can reach out to you?
Yes, I'll share all these links and you can provide them in the show notes, but find me on LinkedIn is a great place to connect. I don't know of any other Garrett Bisses on LinkedIn. So if you find one, let me know, but that's a great place to connect. I'd love to connect and get any messages on there. You can also go to my website, which is garrettbiss.com, and on there's links to the TEDx talk that I did and links to ValiantPath and the Warrior Reset if you're interested in that.
Garrett, do you have any final thoughts like to share with our audience before we wrap up our conversation today?
Yeah, the last thing, and I said this once, but I want to echo it again, that regardless of what you've experienced in your past, regardless of the struggling or the suffering that you're experiencing now, you as an individual, whoever's listening to this, and I say this with complete faith, that you as an individual are lovable and acceptable just as you are. Some of the suffering and the struggle that you've experienced in the past was not there meant to punish you, but meant to help you grow into the version of yourself that you want to be. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing about you or about your past or about your current state that you should be ashamed of sharing with at least a trust close to advisor, because I want you to get on that journey and I want you to get to that on that path to being the version of yourself that you want to be.
Well, Garrett, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again and sharing us with your experiences and what you went through and how you're helping other people. I think what you're doing is so important. So I'm just so happy and thrilled that you decided to come on this, because I think what you're doing is so important, because I do feel like there's a lot of people out there that don't know about the resources, the tools, thank you for sharing all of that. And, hope we can help as many people as possible. And I'm glad I was able to be like a small part of that effort. You're obviously doing everything, but as part of why I created this podcast is to have people like you that are really trying to inspire and impact people to have a better life and do amazing things. And it's really amazing. So thank you for everything you're doing. And I'm sure you're helping a lot of people. And again, thank you so much for coming on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm grateful for the work that you're doing to help spread some messages and spread some resources. So thank you so much for that.